Welcome to Sunny's Mindset Lab podcast. Today, we're exploring the gap in the gain with its author, Dan Sullivan. This conversation is about deeply understanding how the way we measure ourselves shapes confidence, progress, and fulfillment.
Thank you, Sunny. The Gap in the Gain was written to help people stop measuring themselves against an ideal future and start recognizing the progress they've already made.
I'm so glad to have you, Dan. I think this is a topic that hits home for so many of us, especially high achievers. Have you ever hit a huge goal, one you worked on for months, maybe years, and then, poof, the feeling is gone in an hour, and you're just left thinking, okay, what's next?
That's the core of the problem. That emptiness is what we're here to talk about. It's not a personal failing, it's a mechanical problem in how we measure.
Fantastic. So we're really going to unpack this today. We'll start with that exact problem, what we're calling the high achiever's dilemma. Then we'll get into the heart of your framework, defining the gap and the gain. From there, we'll explore what it's like to be stuck in that gap, and then, most importantly, how to start living in the gain. We'll wrap up by making it practical, turning it into a daily habit, and understanding the incredible freedom that comes with this shift.
So, Dan, let's start right there with that paradox. It seems counterintuitive. We see people who, from the outside, have it all. They've checked all the boxes, they've hit the goals, they're successful. Yet so many of them are privately miserable, anxious, or just feel hollow. Why is that? Why doesn't achievement seem to equal happiness for so many driven people?
Well, the clue is in the language we use, and it's deeply embedded in our culture. You know, in the book, I go all the way back to Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, that famous phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right, it's foundational.
It is. But think about the word pursuit. The very act of pursuing something implies you don't have it. It puts happiness out there in the future. It turns it into a destination you're always traveling toward, a horizon you can chase your entire life but never actually arrive at. If you're always pursuing happiness, when do you get to just have it?
That is such a profound reframe of something we take for granted, and it plays out in very real ways. It's the "I'll be happy when" syndrome.
Exactly. I have a story that illustrates this perfectly. A friend of mine who is a wealth manager had a client, we'll call him Edward. He was enormously successful. When they started, Edward's goal was clear. Get me to a $5 million portfolio and then I can relax. Then I'll feel secure.
A very common goal?
Very. And they got there. But did he feel secure? No. He immediately said, with inflation and everything, I think the real number is 10 million. So they got to 10 million. Still no feeling of security. Then it was 17 million. By 2019, his portfolio was way beyond that number, yet he was more anxious than ever, constantly worried the market was about to crash. He was so consumed by this fear that he pulled all his money out, abandoning the very strategy that made him wealthy in the first place. He was never measuring what he had, he was always measuring the distance to the next ideal.
That story is actually terrifying because it shows that no amount of external success can fix an internal measurement problem. The goalpost will just keep moving forever. So this brings us perfectly to the core of your framework. Let's break it down. What are these two opposing ways of measuring our lives? What is the gap and what is the gain?
The idea came to me in a moment of, frustration, actually. I was in a workshop with a group of very successful entrepreneurs, and one of them, Bob, was just radiating dissatisfaction. He was incredibly successful, but you could just feel the unhappiness coming off of him.
He was like Edward, but in a different context.
Exactly. So I asked him, Bob, just tell me, what have you accomplished in the last 90 days? And he starts listing these huge wins, landing a major client, launching a new product, amazing things. But then as soon as he finished, he waved his hand and said, yeah, but that doesn't really count because I should have done this, and I didn't finish that. He immediately dismissed all his progress.
He just erased it all?
Instantly. So I walked over to a flip chart and I drew this diagram. I drew a line and put ideal at the top and start at the bottom. In the middle, I put achieved. I said, Bob, your start is where you were 90 days ago. Achieved is where you are today. Your problem is that you are measuring your achievement against your ideal, that perfect future you imagine. This distance, and I pointed to the space between his achievement and his ideal, this is the gap. You are living in the gap, and it is making you miserable.
So the gap is measuring forward against a fantasy.
Precisely. It's measuring yourself against an ideal. And let me be clear, ideals are wonderful. They give us direction, they pull us forward, but they are a terrible, terrible measuring stick. Why? Because the ideal is an unreachable horizon. The moment you take a step toward it, the horizon moves.
I've heard psychologists call that the hedonic treadmill. That's exactly what it is. You get the promotion, you buy the car, you hit the revenue goal, you get a brief thrill, and then your baseline resets.
Your ideal moves further away and you're right back to feeling dissatisfied. If you live your life measuring yourself this way, you are guaranteeing a persistent feeling of failure, no matter how much you actually achieve.
Okay, so if living in the gap is a recipe for misery, what's the alternative? What is the gain?
The gain is the antidote. It's simple, but it requires a complete reversal of your perspective. Instead of looking forward at the vast distance between where you are and your ideal, you have to stop, turn around, and look backward. Measure yourself backward against where you started.
That sounds so simple, yet it feels almost unnatural. We're so conditioned to look ahead.
We are. But think about it. When you measure backward, you're not measuring against an imaginary future or against what someone else has accomplished. You are measuring your actual progress. It's real. It's tangible. You can see how far you've come from your own starting point. And when you do that, the feeling isn't frustration, it's success, satisfaction, and a genuine sense of confidence based on real evidence. You see the gain.
Okay, so the distinction is becoming crystal clear. Gap is measuring forward to an ideal, which creates frustration. Gain is measuring backward from your start point, which creates confidence. I want to dig a little deeper into the consequences of being trapped in the gap. How does that mindset actually affect our behavior, our passions, and the decisions we make every day?
That's a critical question because it affects everything. When your life is driven by the gap, it creates a very specific type of motivation that psychologists have identified. They call it obsessive passion.
Obsessive passion? That sounds intense.
It is. It's fueled by an external need. It's the feeling that I need this promotion to feel worthy. I need this person's approval to feel okay about myself. It creates this unhealthy attachment to outcomes, which leads to short-term, often impulsive decisions, and it's a direct path to burnout. You're always trying to fill an internal void with an external achievement.
And the alternative?
The alternative, which comes from living in the gain, is called harmonious passion. This isn't driven by a need, it's driven by an internal want. You are 100% committed to your goal, but your self-worth isn't tied to the outcome. There's a healthy detachment. This allows you to think long-term, to be purposeful, and to access that state of flow where we all do our best work.
There's a perfect modern example of this. The quarterback Trevor Lawrence, before he was the #1 draft pick in the NFL, he gave an interview where he said something that made the sports world go crazy. He said, "I don't need football to make me feel worthy as a person."
I remember that. People thought he wasn't competitive, that he didn't want it enough.
Exactly. They completely misunderstood him because they were thinking from the gap. What he was actually describing was the absolute pinnacle of a high-performance mindset. He was describing harmonious passion. He went on to say, "I am internally motivated. I purely love the game." He is 100% committed to winning, but his identity, his worth as a human being, is not on the line with every throw. And paradoxically, that healthy detachment, that lack of desperate need, is what frees him up to perform at his absolute best.
It really feels like our entire society is a training ground for the gap. When you think about it, from a very young age in school, what are we taught? We're graded on a curve, measured against the average. The entire model is external comparison.
It starts there, absolutely. And now in the modern world, we've supercharged it with social media. It's an engine for upward social comparison that runs 24/7. You're scrolling through an endless, perfectly curated highlight reel of everyone else's life and measuring your own messy, real-time reality against that impossible ideal.
It reminds me of that line from the documentary, The Social Dilemma. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
That's it right there. The product isn't the app. It's the gradual, insidious change in your own perception and behavior. The platforms are designed to make you feel like you're lacking, like you're in the gap. So you keep scrolling, keep engaging, keep comparing. It's the old saying, comparison is the thief of joy, but weaponized on a global scale.
So it's clear we're fighting against some pretty powerful forces, our own cultural conditioning, our education, and modern technology. This brings us to the most vital question, Dan. Knowing all this, what do we do about it? How do we consciously choose a different path and start to build a mindset of living in the gain? The first and most important step is simply realizing that you have a choice in how you measure your life. You can choose your reference point. I love the story of the Olympic speed skater Dan Jansen.
Oh, I remember him, a phenomenal skater, but so much heartbreak at the Olympics.
Exactly. He was always the favorite, the world record holder, but something always went wrong at the Games. Going into his very last Olympic race ever, in 1994, he had just suffered another devastating loss. He was at rock bottom. But before that final race, his coach helped him completely shift his mindset. Instead of focusing on the gold medal he needed to validate his entire career, he started thinking about everything he had gained.
What do you mean?
He thought about the journey, his love for skating, the support of his coaches and his family, his sister who had passed away. He was suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude for the entire experience. He decided to skate that last race not out of a desperate need to win, but as an expression of pure joy and thanks for his life in the sport. He was smiling during the race. And what happened? He not only won the gold medal, he smashed the world record. He became a champion the moment he stopped needing to be one.
What a story. So Dan Jansen basically created his own internal win before he even stepped on the ice. He changed his own definition of success for that race. Dan Sullivan. He became self-determined, and that's the key to living in the game. You have to stop using external scorecards and create your own. My good friend, the brilliant marketer Dean Jackson, has a great method for this. Most people live by the rule, I'll be successful when, which of course puts success forever in the future. Right, back to the pursuit of happiness. Dean just flipped the language. He created a list titled, I know I'm being successful when. It's a list of criteria that are true for him in the present. Things like, I know I'm being successful when I can wake up and ask, what would I like to do today? Or when there are no whiny people in my life. Or my favorite, when I wear my watch for curiosity only. This list is his internal compass. It's his personal definition of a successful life, right now. It allows him to measure his life against his own values, not someone else's.
Creating your own criteria, that sounds like true freedom.
It is, and it leads to a much higher form of freedom. The philosopher Erich Fromm wrote about this. He said there are two types of freedom. The first is freedom from tyranny, from hunger, from external constraints. When you're in the gap, you are constantly seeking freedom from. You're trying to escape the feeling of not being good enough, of not having enough.
It's a reactive state.
Entirely. But living in the gain gives you access to the higher freedom, freedom to. This is an internal state. It is the freedom to choose your purpose, to define your own life, to be your own master. It's driven by an internal want, not an external need. It's what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization. You simply cannot get there if you're living in the psychological prison of the gap.
That distinction between freedom from and freedom to is so powerful. It really changes the entire goal. Okay, so we understand the concepts intellectually. We see the benefits. But, as we discussed, our brains are wired for the gap. It's a deeply ingrained habit. So how do we make living in the gain a new habit? What are the practical, actionable things someone listening can start doing tonight to retrain their brain?
It has to become a deliberate practice, especially at first. You're carving new neural pathways. The simplest, most effective exercise I know is to end every day by measuring your gains for that day.
So a daily review.
Yes, but a specific kind. Before you go to sleep, take 3 minutes. The key is you are not measuring your day against the ideal day you had planned. You're not looking at your to-do list and seeing what you didn't finish. You measure the day backward from where you were when you woke up that morning.
So the starting point is just, I was asleep.
Exactly. From that point, what progress did you make? What are 3 things that are gains today? And they don't have to be earth-shattering. Maybe you finally made that phone call you were dreading. That's a gain. Maybe you went for a 15-minute walk. That's a gain. Maybe you learned one new idea from a book. That's a gain. Write them down. The physical act of writing them down makes it real and reinforces the new habit. You are training your brain to spot progress.
That feels very doable. And I imagine once you get into that daily habit, you can start applying this thinking to bigger things. That's where it becomes truly life-changing. Once you master the daily practice, you can apply this mindset to every experience, especially the most negative and painful ones.
Wait, so you're saying even a total disaster can be a gain?
It can be transformed into a gain. The experience itself might be terrible, but you always have the power to choose what you learn from it. You can ask, what did I gain from this happening that I can use for my future? A good friend of mine, Jeff, went through a brutal, unexpected divorce. It could have destroyed him. He could have lived in that trauma for a decade.
Many people do.
They do. But Jeff, who understood this concept, consciously chose to frame the experience as a gain. He didn't pretend it didn't hurt, but he focused on being grateful for the 15 great years of marriage they'd had, for his 3 wonderful children. He focused on what he learned about himself and what he wanted in a future relationship. He transformed a potential trauma into a powerful lesson that ultimately made him a wiser, stronger person. That is the ultimate power of this mindset.
The ability to reframe pain into progress, that's like a psychological superpower. It makes you almost anti-fragile. So let's zoom out, Dan. What happens to a person who makes this a lifelong practice? What are the cumulative long-term effects of living in the gain on our health, our success, and even our lifespan?
The long-term impact is staggering.
And it's not just psychological, it's deeply biological. There was a remarkable study done on 180 Catholic nuns, which is famous because they all lived very similar lifestyles. Same diet, same environment.
So it was a very controlled group.
Perfectly controlled. When they were young women in their early 20s, they each wrote a short autobiographical essay. Decades later, researchers went back and analyzed those essays, simply scoring them for their level of positive emotional content, words expressing joy, gratitude, love. The results were mind-blowing. The nuns in the top quartile for positivity lived, on average, nearly 10 years longer than the nuns in the bottom quartile.
10 years.
10 years. At 85, 90% of the happiest group were still alive. In the least happy group, only 34% were still alive. Your habitual mindset, whether you are in the gap or the gain, literally adds or subtracts a decade from your life.
That is unbelievable. So our perception, our framing of life can literally change our biology? Without question. And we have the science to prove it in real time. There was a brilliant study done at Yale. Researchers had people drink a 380-calorie milkshake. The trick was, they told one group it was a 620-calorie indulgent shake. They told the other group it was a 140-calorie sensible health shake. But it was the exact same shake, identical. They then measured the levels of ghrelin in their blood. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. When it's high, you feel hungry. When it drops, you feel full. The results were incredible. The group that believed they were drinking the indulgent shake, their ghrelin levels plummeted, signaling to their brain and body that they were full and satisfied. The group that thought they were drinking the sensible shake, their ghrelin levels barely changed. Their bodies responded not to the physical reality of the milkshake, but to their mindset about it. That's the power of the gain. How you frame your experience changes your body's chemistry.
It all comes full circle. The way you measure changes your feelings, which changes your biology, which changes your life. That's it. If there's one thing to take away from our entire conversation, it's this. The way to measure your progress is backward, against where you started, not forward against your ideal. That single shift is the key to happiness, confidence, and continued success.
So it's not about abandoning ambition. It's about fueling your future ambition with the confidence and energy that comes from appreciating your past accomplishments. You build your future on a foundation of recognized progress.
You got it. The appreciation for your past gains is the fuel for all your future growth.
Dan, thank you for such a thoughtful conversation. This discussion gives our listeners a complete understanding of the ideas in the gap and the gain.
Thank you, Sonny. I hope listeners begin measuring their lives in ways that build confidence and appreciation, rather than frustration.
This has been Sonny's Mindset Lab. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.